Lover's Moon, a novel by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss, read by the authors. Chapter 11. Michael, 2:48 p.m. 24 days, I muttered. Then I shook my head, thumbed off the app I'd been looking at, and shoved the phone back in my pocket. Thinking like this and doing the math was starting to freak me out. Because I shouldn't be so obsessed. I couldn't afford to be. The app I'd been looking at was one I used to help me calculate when I was most likely to turn into my wolf self. While there was the occasional variation of the pattern, it usually happened when the moon was at least 3/4 full. And I had just calculated, given that the moon would be at 78.2% on June 18th, that I had 24 days, or at least 24 more nights, with Gail. But I had to stop myself from thinking like that. Last night was good. Oh, who am I kidding? Last night was amazing. So was this morning. If I was completely honest with myself, I don't think I'd had sex as many times previously in my entire life as I'd had with Gail last night, and through both the wee hours and late hours of this morning. I actually lost count. And one might only imagine I should have been keeping count, particularly because it had been so long for me. 8 dry years. I had, of course, been purposely avoiding the opportunity any time it might have come up. However infrequently that happened in the past. In the early days of trying to figure out the best way to live with my werewolf curse, I'd been worried. Because one never truly knows, right? There's no guidebook, no manual on how to be a werewolf and how it worked. It was something I needed to learn. And something I'd done entirely on my own. There was an old television show I'd watched when I was young, The Incredible Hulk. I don't think I'd seen it during its initial run, but rather when it was in syndication. The Hulk, of course, also appeared in the occasional Spider-Man comic over the years of my reading it, but it was that TV show I remembered most. Because whenever Dr. David Banner got angry, he would rage and morph into a huge, green-skinned, strong and savage creature. I would never forget the words that accompanied the opening to each episode. "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." In the early days, I worried that the wolf in me might also make itself known if my own emotions peaked in any way, such as having an orgasm. In the handful of short-lived relationships I'd had over the past 8 years, I completely avoided physical intimacy, because I was too afraid that if I orgasmed, I might completely lose control of my human nature, and the beast would take over. It wasn't that outrageous a thing to think about, because every once in a while I would get angry or react to something, and I'd let out a growl that was far deeper, more guttural than I think any normal human could ever make. So the beast, the animal, was there. And the idea of losing control and morphing into a wolf while in the throes of passion terrified me. Over the years, something happened that allowed me to forget the pain, torture, and extreme loss of control that came as I changed into a wolf. I figured I'd blocked it from my conscious mind because it was too unbearable for any sane person to live with. But I still remember the utter terror of what it felt like to border on the edge of control. And in a parallel sense, that loss of control was something similar to the experience of an orgasm. An orgasm was definitely an incredible feeling of ecstatic pleasure, and morphing into a wolf was extreme and outrageous pain. But the intensity was similar. And so was a terrifying loss of control. Considering the number of times I'd orgasmed with Gail in the past 24 hours, I could pretty much put that little theory to rest. If the intensity of the extremes of pleasure and absolute loss of control we'd experienced didn't set off my metamorphosis, then nothing, other than the full moon, of course, could do that. And so I'd caught myself checking that lunar calendar app and calculating how many more nights I could continue to have sex with Gail before the inevitable. Because I needed to be far from her on the nights of the full moon. I had no consciousness of my time as a wolf, and thus had no idea how my wolf sense would react to waking up next to a female human. And I could never risk that. I could never put Gail in that kind of danger. Come June 18th, I'd have to call an end to these naked romps under the sheets. Or maybe I should consider calling it quits early. After all, Gail was a scholar of the occult. She understood this paranormal stuff better than I did. It was why I needed her help with research. If I started making myself scarce at the tip of each full moon, it wouldn't take long for her to figure out what was really going on. Combine that with her obvious intuition and observation skills, and she'd be able to figure out the reason I knew so much. It was because I could overhear those phone conversations, even across a crowded and noisy cafe, even when it was whispered behind closed doors. And she'd figure out my extreme sense of smell too, either in my overreaction to subtle scents or when I had the knack of knowing a person's emotions. No, she'd figure it out. She was too smart not to. And I was a horrible liar. I already felt like she could see right through me. It would likely be best to return to a platonic relationship. She had been the one, after all, to jokingly say she could never be in a couple with someone with my particular taste in music. We had both been sexually attracted to one another, and we had an exceptional time letting go of every single inhibition. And it was amazing, incredible. But she needed to get back to her celibate year. And I needed to get back to being a blue balls loser. Not to mention, I needed to return to the front of that keyboard and continue bringing myself back on track with a novel that was already overdue. I nodded my head and took in a deep breath. It was settled. We couldn't keep doing what we'd done last night and this morning. We would need to return to the strictly business plan we originally established. We needed to put some walls, some distance, between us. So why, then, was I telling myself this, while waiting in line to pick up tickets for tonight's performance of an off-Broadway show? You've been listening to Lover's Moon, a paranormal romantic comedy by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Read by the authors. Lover's Moon is book 5 in the Canadian Werewolf Series, published by Stark Publishing and available in print, ebook, and audiobook. The music used in this production, Waltz Primordial by Kevin MacLeod featuring Alexander Nakarada, was licensed via Incomptech.com and is copyrighted by Kevin MacLeod.